The house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that pressed in around the edges, like fog that seeps under doors and into bones. Elena Gray sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched mug of coffee in front of her. It had long gone cold. 4 days since Jeremy's funeral, and she still hadn't touched the box of his things from the county morgue. His shoes, his hoodie, his broken phone relics now. The world had moved on. The police report was filed. The obituary was written. The casket was sealed. Accidental overdose in custody, they'd said, their voices low, practiced, unfeeling. A few half-sincere condolences from city officials had followed. He was troubled, they'd whispered, when they thought she couldn't hear. Maybe she didn't see the signs. She saw all the signs, but none of them pointed to what they were claiming. The phone rang. She let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. She picked it up on the third try. Her voice cracked out. Of her like a whisper through glass. Hello? Silence. Then breathing shallow, fast. Mrs. Gray. A boy's voice no older than 12, maybe 13. African-American, soft-spoken but rushed, like someone terrified to be caught speaking. Yes, she said, sitting straighter. Who is this? You don't know me, but your son, Jeremy. He's not dead. I saw him. They said ... after the news said. Elena's fingers curled tight around the phone. What did you just say? I saw him. 2 nights ago. He was hurt but walking. They took him somewhere, in a van. Not cops, not regular. I know what I saw. Is this some kind of sick joke? No, ma'am, the boy said, almost trembling through the speaker. Please, I just thought you should know. They're lying. Clicky was gone. The silence was louder than before. Elena sat there for a long time, staring out the window where Jeremy used to mow the lawn barefoot in the summer. Her body went. Still, like grief had become something cold and ironclad. She remembered the sealed casket, the fact that they wouldn't let her see the body, the official procedures. The way Officer Daniels had avoided eye contact that night, and now a stranger's voice, like a stone dropped into still water, had cracked the surface of her world. She stood slowly, as if testing her own weight, and moved to the hallway. Jeremy's room was exactly as he'd left it the week before his arrest. Basketball posters, sketchbooks with half-finished art, a wrinkled hoodie draped over his chair. She picked up his sketchbook and turned to a page she hadn't noticed before, a drawing of 2 boys walking in the dark. One guiding the other by the hand. A line was scribbled below it in his handwriting. When no one sees you, find someone who can. Her breath hitched. Her hands trembled. Her grief no longer felt clean or closed. It felt wide open. Pressed the phone to her ear again, redialed the number. But it rang to voicemail. Again. Nothing. Elena collapsed into the chair, no longer crying, just breathing. Shallow and rhythmic, like a diver preparing to go under. She didn't know who the boy was, didn't know if it was a lie, a mistake, a cruel prank, but she knew what her gut said, and it wasn't finished grieving. It was just getting started. She grabbed her coat, stepped into the July heat, and locked the door behind her. It was time to ask the questions they didn't want her to ask. The sky was dusky when Elena returned home. The sun bleeding orange through the blinds, as if the house itself were bruised. She moved automatically keys in the bowl, shoes by the door, but her heart lagged behind, still stuck in that moment on the porch when the stranger's voice had cleaved her. Reality in 2, she wandered into the dining room without meaning. 2, eyes locking on the chair at the end of the table. Jeremy's chair, still pushed slightly back from the last meal they'd shared. Chinese takeout and an argument over the latest charges resisting arrest, they'd said. He told her not to worry. She had anyway. Now the chair sat empty like a scar. She sank into her seat and opened the manila folder she'd kept sealed since the funeral. Inside, the official police report, a short obituary, and a thin stack of papers filled with bureaucratic language and quiet omissions. The arrest report said Jeremy had been stopped for matching the description of a burglary suspect. No. Further detail, the coroner's note said overdose, didn't list the substance. The intake photo they provided wasn't even time-stamped. Alina stared at his eyes in the grainy image, bruised, bloodshot, afraid. She turned the page and froze. No viewing permitted due to state health code protocol, it read in bold. She remembered protesting that at the morgue. Did I want to see? My son? I'm sorry, ma'am. The body's not in a condition we'd advise, Officer Daniels had said, not looking at her. Not once. She hadn't pressed harder. She was too broken to fight. Now, shame surged inside her. Not because she'd failed, but because she'd believed them. Because she thought being white in that system gave her access to truth. And yet, every door had quietly closed in her face. She picked up her phone and scrolled back to the night of Jeremy's arrest. March 16th. The text he'd sent. Mom, they're pulling me over. Don't freak. She had freaked. Then came the call. He was in custody. Hours later, he was gone. She rose slowly and walked to his room, flipping on the light. The air still carried traces of his cologne. She ran her hand along his bookshelf, pausing on the framed photo of him. At his art show, proud grin and all. He'd been the only black student in his high school AP art class. She remembered the microaggressions he never brought up unless she asked. It's whatever he'd say. I just want to be seen for what I do, not how I look. But the system had seen only one thing, and now it wanted her to forget. Alina looked around the room. His desk, his sketchbook, his dreams untouched. Yet something gnawed at her now, a shadow between truth and narrative. Between the closed casket and the open wound, she returned. To the dining table, unfolding the arrest report once more. There it was, one small detail she hadn't caught before. Witness present at scene. Minor male, unconfirmed identity. Her heart caught in her throat. The voice on the phone. She had to find him. She had to find the boy. The name came from a whisperer woman Alina barely remembered from PTA meetings at the middle school. Try the Brooks family, she'd said. When Alina showed her the arrest report, Zion was there that night. I think he saw something, but he's scared. They all are. The Brooks family lived in a worn red brick building on the south side of town where sidewalks cracked and streetlights flickered. Alina had driven past that neighborhood 100 times before without ever really seeing it. Now, she was walking. Up the narrow steps of apartment 3B, with her heart pounding like a drum in her throat. The door opened a crack. The chain still latched. A woman's wary eyes peered through. Alina Gray, she said quickly, holding up the police report. I'm looking for Zion. I believe he called me. About my son, Jeremy. The eyes blinked, then narrowed. You need to leave, miss. It's not safe, and this ain't your street. Please, Alina said, her voice fraying, said Jeremy's. Alive? I just need to know what he saw. There was silence, and the door closed. Alina turned to leave, but after a pause, it opened again. Fully this time, Zion Brooks stood behind his mother, slight and wiry, with wide, frightened eyes that looked much older than his 13 years. He can speak for a minute, the mother said, but not in here. Too many years. They walked together to a nearby Alinero, fenced in and quiet. Zion didn't meet her eyes. His hands fidgeted with the edge of his sleeve. I didn't mean to cause no trouble, muttered. You didn't, Alina said gently. You may be the only person who hasn't lied to me. Zion's breath hitched. Then, in a low voice, he began. I was near the corner store that night. They had your son cuffed, face down on the sidewalk. One of the cops, Daniels, I think. Pressing his knee on his back, Jeremy was saying he couldn't breathe, but they told him to shut up. Alina felt her chest tighten. Then a van pulled up. Zion continued, not marked. 2 men got out, didn't look like cops. No badges. They talked quiet, like they already knew the deal. Put your son in the back. He wasn't moving much, but I swear I saw his eyes. He was still awake, still alive. Did anyone else see? Alina asked, voice cracking. A couple of us. But we don't talk. Not around here. They do. Cops ask questions later if ever. Why did you call me? Zion finally looked up. Because he didn't do nothing wrong, and they're going to do it again if no one stops them. Alina swallowed the lump rising in her throat. Can you come forward? Give a statement? He took a step back, eyes wide with fear. They'll come for me, or my mom, or my little brother. I know how they work. I'll protect you. Can't, he said quietly. Not from them. The shadows stretched long over the alley as the sun dipped low behind the building's Zion. Took something from his jacket, Paquita, a scrap of paper with an address scrawled in pencil. I heard. One of them mentioned this place, he said, pressing it into her palm. Don't tell nobody I gave it to you. Then he turned and ran, swallowed by the streets before she could say thank you. Alina stood alone in the alley. Paper in hand, wind rising. She knew one thing now with a clarity that cut deeper than grief. Her son's death was a lie, and the truth lived somewhere in the darkness, waiting to be found. Alina couldn't sleep that night. The address Zion gave her burned in her palm like it had been branded there. But the memory of his voice, low, afraid, honest, burned even deeper. She returned to the Brooks apartment the next afternoon, carrying a small bag of groceries as an excuse. Zion's mother answered with tired eyes, and after a long pause, she stepped aside. Zion was seated on the worn sofa, hoodie pulled over his head. He didn't look up until Alina sat beside him. I shouldn't have called, he said. You were brave, she replied softly, and I'm not going away. He glanced at the door, as if expecting someone to burst in. Then, after a long silence, you want to know what really happens to boys like Jeremy? She nodded. They call it protective transfer on paper. That's the word they use when they move someone from holding. But out here we call it what it is, disappearing. Zion leaned forward, eyes focused on the floor. They take boys late at night, no charges filed, just gone. My cousin Malik, same thing. Picked up last summer for curfew violation, never made it to court. They said he ran, that's all we got. A sentence. No search, no answers, just a shrug. Elena's hands gripped each other tightly in her lap. They put them in unmarked vans. Always around midnight. That's why we call it the midnight transfer. Sometimes they come back beat up, different. But most don't. We stop asking, because when you ask, they follow you, or your mom. Elena's voice cracked. Why isn't anyone stopping this? Zion finally looked at her. Because nobody listens when it's us. You think this system's broken? Nah, it's working just how they built it. You just didn't see it before. His words weren't angry, they were exhausted. She sat in silence, absorbing it. The weight of what Jeremy's story might really be was starting to outgrow even her worst fears. And now she had names, patterns, a map of silence drawn across an entire neighborhood. Zion reached into his backpack and handed her something else, a worn notebook with pages torn out. Inside, he'd recorded names, dates, times. These are the boys who vanished, he said. Far as I could track. Lena flipped through the pages. 16 families. 16 families. 16 missing sons. You keep this secret, he said. You show it loud, they'll come fast. I won't say where it came from, she promised. But I will show it. Zion nodded once, solemn. Then he turned the TV on and leaned back, like the conversation had aged him another year. As Alina walked out into the sunlight, notebook clutched in her hand, she felt the familiar pull of grief. But this time, it was sharpened with fury. Jeremy was part of something bigger, and someone was hiding it. She looked down at the notebook. There was only one place to go next, the police station. The precinct smelled like cold coffee and bleach. But beneath it all, something sour lingered like fear that had settled into the walls. Alina stepped inside, clutching Zion's notebook. In her bag, like it might vanish if she loosened her grip. She'd rehearsed what to say, over and over. But her mouth felt dry as paper. Behind a thick plexiglass window sat a woman in a navy blue sweater, tapping idly at a keyboard. Hi, Elena said, her voice careful. I'm here to request access to files related to Jeremy Gray. He was arrested. And ... he died in custody. The clerk, a black woman in her late 40s, looked up with calm, unreadable eyes. You, the mother? I am. A pause. Then a nod. Hold on. She disappeared through a door to the left. Delina was left standing under the buzz of a flickering fluorescent light. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, The door opened again. Out stepped Officer Daniels. He still had the same smug squint she remembered. Broad chest, clean uniform. It's not a speck out of place. "Mrs. Gray," he said, stretching the syllables like taffy. "Didn't expect to see you back here. I want the files," she said. "All of them. The arrest record, intake footage, body cam. Any notes on the night my son was taken?" He gave a half laugh, shook his head like she'd asked for national secrets. "Well, no, I'm afraid that's not how this works. Those materials are sealed under internal review protocols. Standard procedure, then unseal them," she snapped. "He was my son." His smile didn't waver. "And we respect your loss. But policy is policy. You know these things can be emotionally complicated." Elena's stomach clenched. She recognized the tone, for compassion layered over dismissal. The kind of voice that let you know you were being handled and heard. "I know what you did," she whispered. "I know Jeremy didn't overdose. I know about the van. The other boys?" Daniel's eyes didn't flicker, not even a twitch. "That's a serious accusation," he said smoothly. "I'd advise you to be careful where you point that grief. People grieve in strange ways. You're lying." He leaned in slightly, lowered his voice. "Mrs. Gray, you need to let your son rest. Stirring the pot doesn't change what happened. It only makes things harder for everyone." Her breath caught. He was calm, like he'd done this before, like it was a script. Behind the glass, the desk clerk reappeared, watching silent. Elena turned toward her. Their eyes met for just a beat too long. The woman pressed a sticky note against the glass, just as Daniels turned away. Elena blinked. A name, a time, a location, community council, Friday at 7 p.m. Ask for Marcia Bell. By the time she looked back, the note was gone. The clerk had returned to typing. Daniels had disappeared behind the door. Elena stepped outside, her lungs finally filling with air. She had found her wall, but someone had just handed her a door. The church basement buzzed with low voices and cautious glances. Folding chairs circled under soft yellow lighting. The walls lined with flyers. "Know your rights. Hold the badge accountable. Missing Darius W." Elena paused at the door. This wasn't her world. The faces here were mostly black. Grief hung in the air, thick and quiet and long-suffering. These weren't people still learning the truth. They were people who had lived with it, fought it, buried it. And here she was, the white woman who had only just begun to peel back the curtain. A woman in a denim jacket approached. "You here for Marcia?" "I am," Elena replied. "She told me to come." The woman studied her a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in." "Listen," Elena took a seat at the edge of the circle. No one smiled. No one welcomed her. And she didn't expect them to. In the center, a tall woman with salt-streaked braids stood and cleared her throat. Her presence was calm, fierce, rooted like an old tree that had weathered too many storms. "I'm Marcia Bell," she began. "And I'm tired." There were nods, murmurs of agreement. "I'm tired of burying boys, tired of holding up mothers who can't even stand. Tired of sitting across from men in uniforms who tell us that our sons vanished because they were reckless or angry or high, when we know better." Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't stop. "We know some of them are still out there, being used, hidden, forgotten. And it doesn't matter how many marshes we hold, how many names we shout, unless more people start paying attention." Then her eyes landed on Elena. "A new face tonight." Elena stood slowly. "My name is Elena Gray, my son. Jeremy. He was arrested. They told me he overdosed in custody." Soft gasps rippled through the room. I believed them. Until someone told me otherwise. A boy named Zion. He said he saw Jeremy taken in a van, that he wasn't dead, so that others were taken too. A silence fell. Then one woman spoke. "My nephew's name was Devante, gone after a traffic stop." Another. "My son Marcus was 17, last seen in cuffs, never made it to jail." They began to speak, one by one. Not for her, but near her, around her. Stories stacked like bricks. each one building the architecture of a truth she could no longer deny. Alina didn't speak again that night. She listened. She wrote names. She sat with the weight of their pain, and slowly their suspicion shifted. To trust, not yet, but to allowance. She wasn't the center here. She was a witness. As the meeting closed, Marcia approached her. "You want to help?" she asked. "Yes," Alina said. "Then you march with us tomorrow. But understand this fight didn't start with your son. And it won't end with him." Alina nodded. "I understand." She stepped back into the night air, notebook in hand, fire in her chest. Tomorrow. She would march. But tonight she had somewhere to go. Elena's shoes crunched over broken glass as she followed Zion through the alley, her breath tight with nerves. The night after the march, he'd met her at the corner of 82nd and Fremont without a word, just a nod and a warning, no questions. "Just follow me." They passed two boarded-up storefronts and ducked behind a rusted chain-link fence into the shadows of what looked like a condemned school. Zion led her through a side entrance, the door wedged open with a rock. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and dust. The fluorescent lights were long dead. Only moonlight poured through cracks in the walls, slicing the dark into narrow strips. "This used to be a juvenile detention annex," Zion whispered, pulling out a small flashlight. "Shut down years ago." "Officially and unofficially?" Lena asked. Zion pointed down a hallway where faded signs still labeled holding room A and medical. "They bring kids here off the books. Cup security contractors, not regular cops. They wear black uniforms. No names. No cameras." They reached a door with peeling paint. Zion pushed it open. The room inside was cold and sterile. Metal beds with leather restraints, empty lockers, a dented file cabinet shoved into the corner. Alina stepped in slowly. Her fingers traced the edge of a cot. Something about it felt too recent, like it hadn't been abandoned at all. Zion opened the locker and pulled out a plastic ID card. Jeremy Gray. Intake. March 17th. Alina staggered back. "It was real. You see why I called now?" Zion whispered. She nodded, too stunned to speak. Then, from outside the faint crunch of tires on gravel, Zion's head snapped toward the window. A black SUV idled just beyond the fence. "No plates. They're here," he said. "We gotta go now." They ran back the way they came, slipping through the hole in the fence just as the SUV's headlights flicked on. A voice shouted behind them. Zion pulled her into an alley, ducking low. The SUV crept past the opening, slow and searching. Elena's heart slammed in her chest. The file, the photo, the bed. It was all real. When the SUV finally turned the corner, Zion pulled her to her feet. "We don't have long," he said. "They know someone's talking." Lena nodded, shaking. They disappeared into the dark, footsteps fast, minds racing. Back at her car, Alina sat for a full minute before starting the engine. There were documents in that building. Names, proof, and they were willing to kill to keep it hidden. She looked over at Zion, who was silent now, staring out the window. He was just a boy, but he'd carried the truth on his back for too long. Tomorrow, she would protect him, even if it meant putting herself in the line of fire. The threats came quietly at. First, 2 nights after the abandoned facility, a rock shattered the front window of Zion's apartment. No note, just silence. His grandmother called Alina in a panic. "They know he's talking," she said, "and I got a bad feeling they won't stop at glass." Alina moved Zion and his grandmother into her guest room that same night. 3 days later, her own home was broken into. Nothing stolen, just drawers ransacked, papers scattered, photo frames shattered on the floor. A single fingerprint wiped across the framed photo of Jeremy on the mantel. It wasn't robbery. It was a warning. Still, she refused to back down. She contacted Marcia Bell, who helped organize a press conference. Local press outlets agreed to attend, though several declined once they heard it involved sensitive accusations against law enforcement. Alina stood on the courthouse steps with Zion beside her and Marcia behind them. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "My name is Alina Gray," she began, the cameras clicking. "My son Jeremy was taken into police custody and reported dead." That was a lie. She held up Jeremy's intake photo and a copy of the ID card they'd found. "I am no longer asking for answers. I am demanding them not just for Jeremy, but for every boy who's vanished without explanation. For every family denied truth. For every child criminalized before they could even be heard." Zion stepped forward next. His voice shook, but he did not look away from the crowd. "They told me to shut up, that I'd end up like the others. But I'm not scared anymore. Somebody has to say what they're doing." The press conference lasted 12 minutes. By the evening news, it had been reduced to 30 seconds. "Local mother makes inflammatory claims against police," one anchor intoned, eyes cold behind the camera. "Officials urge caution as misinformation spreads during a time of social tension." The next morning, Elena's inbox was flooded with hate mail. "Race baiter, white traitor, you're not one of us anymore." What one video clip up? Phone recording from a college student in the crowd began to circulate online, showed Elena's closing words raw and unscripted. "You call it division, I call it truth. And if that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe you were never looking for justice to begin with." It was shared 20,000 times in 12 hours. By nightfall, national outlets were calling. But Alina didn't care about interviews. She was chasing one thing now. The location scrawled in the corner of Jeremy's intake card. A decommissioned church on the edge of the city. The church stood like a ghost on the city's edge. Stone walls cracked, windows boarded, the steeple jagged like a broken tooth against the sky. Alina parked 2 blocks away. She didn't bring Zion. Not this time. The location on Jeremy's intake card had matched a close down. Youth ministry abandoned since funding was pulled after a corruption scandal 5 years prior. But 2 words etched into the basement door caught her eye. Authorized entry only. She crept along the side wall, heart hammering, every breath drawn thin. The sun was setting fast. Marcia had given her a key old contacts from her activist years. People who once worked inside. People who still believed in revealing what lived beneath the rot. The rusted door groaned open. The basement was colder than the night air. Lined with concrete walls and echoing silence, she moved cautiously, flashlight bouncing against empty lockers, crates, and dust. Then she saw a hallway leading deeper underground. Steel door at the end left ajar. Inside, a dimly lit space filled with bunk cots, restraints, a single desk, and 3 boys. She froze. One turned toward her. Eyes sunken, face bruised but unmistakable. "Jeremy?" He blinked at her like he couldn't believe she was real. She ran to him, voice cracking with disbelief. "Oh my God, Jeremy." He was thinner, paler, but alive. 2 more. Boys, silent, watched from the corners, faces wary and raw. "Who brought you here?" she asked, holding him. "Private contractors, not cops. They said it was protective custody, but they never let us out. They kept moving us." His voice was a hoarse whisper. "Why?" "'Cause we saw something," he said, "and they didn't want us to remember." She heard footsteps above. A door slammed. They had to go. Alina grabbed a duffel bag from the floor and stuffed Jeremy's intake file. A phone and 2 folders marked redirect unit field reports. The boys followed her without question. They ran up the stairwell. Just as the front doors creaked, someone was coming. They didn't look back. Outside, car waited Marcia behind the wheel. "Get in," she shouted. They sped into the night. Jeremy leaned into her, eyes closing. The sun hadn't yet risen. But Alina knew. The truth had cracked open, and the world would have to answer. Jeremy slept for 2 days in the hospital. Monitors beeped steadily. At his bedside, 4 lines snaking from his arm. Lena never left the room. The doctor said he was malnourished, dehydrated, and deeply traumatized but alive. The others had been released into protective custody, their identities sealed for safety. Marcia stayed close, coordinating legal support while Zion and his grandmother were relocated to a safe location out of state. The nation, however, was no longer silent. Within a week, the footage Alina had taken from the facility aired on multiple networks. The documents tagged with redirect unit and signed by several unnamed city officials were now part of a federal investigation. Officer Daniels was the first to fall, arrested for falsifying custody logs, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to violate civil rights, but many more names remained hidden. When Alina was called to testify before Congress, the room was colder than she'd expected. Wood-paneled walls, pressed suits, and distant eyes watching her like she was a footnote. Still, she spoke about Jeremy, about the van, about the threats, about how easy it had been for the truth to disappear beneath silence and bureaucracy. They told me I should grieve and move on, she said, voice clear. But my son wasn't a page in a report. He was a person. And so were the others. The clip of her testimony, just 8 minutes long, was viewed over 3 million times within days. Zion's story followed, CNN, MSNBC, then schools and town halls. He spoke with trembling courage, always ending the same way. I was scared. But I'm not anymore. The Department of Justice opened a sweeping review of local youth detention policies nationwide. Funding for private youth transport programs was frozen. A national hotline for reporting off-the-books transfers was established. It wasn't perfect. Most of the architects of the redirect unit were still free, hiding behind layers of legal insulation. But something had shifted. One night, weeks later, Alina walked past Jeremy's chair at the dinner table. He was there, still quiet, still, healing, but home. She sat across from him, placed her hand over his. "We're not done," she said softly. Jeremy nodded. "I know." Saw a protest pass by in the street. Hundreds of voices, signs raised high. No justice, no peace. Protect our boys. Believe black youth. One voice had started it. But now a movement was roaring, and it would not be silenced.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.